right, let me just share this new link with everybody. Oh, look at all those messages. I'm gonna get the link. All right. That was unfortunate. We had all these great insights, and I've forgotten everything you've said. So we have to start from the start. We're all
Okay, that's
like
good.
20 minutes ago. We need to go back. Um, I guess we'll do introductions again. Just kidding. Welcome back, everybody.
I'm curious how far we got though. I don't know where it dropped out for everybody, so
I don't
let
know
us
where it,
know.
it dropped out either. There was a moment where I was typing in here, I think, and you took like 5 seconds to respond, and I thought, am I lagging? And I guess maybe I was. Um, so don't forget, for those who have made it over here, now you have to like this one as well.
Yep.
You gotta do it again. It's just we all have to press buttons to get this back up to where it was. Uh, we've pressed our buttons. Now you have to press that button. So just as you were going through the pass through. Okay, so it
Yes,
was really
yes.
just the end.
Yeah. So just as a brief recap on that, we have a thing that logs stuff. And if you remember, from the scene class's perspective, it's an iLogger. It doesn't care what the iLogger looks like. It just cares as long as it's got a log method, I'll give it stuff and it'll do stuff. And one type of iLogger could just be an iLogger that takes in an iLogger, right? That's just another type of logger. It doesn't really matter. In this case, it's a pass through. It doesn't do anything. It just takes in a logger and just sends the information to it. But the name should give it a hint. It's a color logger. We should be able to allow colors on this. So the way I want to handle this is on 144, do a public color. Yeah. And make it a capital C and do a getter and setter for this one.
Okay, and tell me, how do I do a getter and setter?
Curly brackets, get, comma, yeah, get, full, semicolon, set, semicolon.
Ah,
Semicolon, sorry, not full colon.
oh,
Yep. So that now says here's a property of color that we can use now that we can set. And you can also assign a default value to this. I'm going to say logs by default should be what? White is a standard color or something. Yeah,
white's
just,
standard, yeah.
yeah, there you go. So we have a color we can now use. So here's where it gets interesting. On line 153, if you just go above that line, first what we'll do is we'll get the string version of that color. So we can say var string color equals color utility. This is an inbuilt Unity thing, by the way. Dot. And then you could say to HTML string RGBA.
RGBA, okay.
Yeah. And then you can just pass in our capital C color. Yep. So now we have a hex format version of that color. Next, we want to build the line that you'd normally write where you wrap a message in color. So on the next line, write color log or var log color, some name for this, which it's the message wrapped in a color. And this we can say equals, and you can do the dollar sign quotes again, yeah. And here we just write the line you'd normally write, the color tag. So the angle brackets color and message in the middle, and then color on the other side.
Okay,
And you yeah.
so
So in this, yeah, so it's curly brackets for that
that's
one.
right.
Oh, you don't need the second quote. Sorry, it's just color
That's
equals.
right.
There's
Okay,
no. Yeah,
because we're building it in line.
yeah.
So okay, color and then curly brackets message,
Mm-hmm.
then close that off.
And you need the closing color tag as well. So that's slash color.
Oh, that's right.
Mm-hmm. And then you can now pass log color in for message there.
Okay.
So with all of that in place, we now have a thing which will take in whatever message was going to be sent it will take whatever color you've currently assigned to the logger. It will then wrap that message in that color and then log it. So what's cool about this now, if you go all the way back up to the top, you now have the freedom to set a color on that logger. And then, so say for example, now there's one caveat to this with the way casting works. Because it's an I logger, you can't see that value. So where you've got the semicolon there, just put curly brackets instead of the semicolon. And then you can set color equals some color there. Explaining why it works like that is out of scope for this, but just trust me on that one. So what this means now is every log that comes out of this script will be logged in cyan. But what's cool is if you wanted to, you could have a second Boolean. So maybe make a Boolean called colorful logs or something. And you could now, if it's colorful logs, use that one. Otherwise, set the logger to just the normal logger.
Okay, so I would say, let me just write this one out. Logger equals new color, or yeah, color logger new unity logger. And for color, so if colorful logs is true, we would want to pass this in.
Well, you could actually just use that logger entirely. So it's the top one can just be unity logger. You don't need the color logger at all, right?
Oh, that's true.
And then you could say, if you do want colorful logs, the second one could be then replace it with a one that's a colorful logger. So if you put the if statement above, in between those two lines.
Just like that?
There you go. So the logger is a unity logger, but if it's colorful logs, it's a colorful unity logger, right?
So this replaces that.
Exactly. And what we get for free, even though we didn't really think about it, if you wanted colorful text logs to be displayed in the actual, like on a label on the scene, you wouldn't have to change anything other than the new unity logger in the middle. You could swap that out for a new text logger and you get all the colorful changes, but you still get to change the source of where the logs go to. So now they're completely separate. You can choose colors separately from choosing logs separately, from choosing sources separately, and all of these things are completely separate from the class itself.
Okay.
So the next step then to kind of move this further out of the class is right now in the class itself, we're setting all of this up. Now this is a configuration. This is us configuring how this class should work. It really shouldn't be the job of the scene to make these decisions. So what you can do is you can move all of this stuff out. So first of all, if you click that and click Alt Enter, there's an option to move to its own file. Yeah, move to .cs.
Mm-hmm. And do these, I always just choose in file. Is that?
Yeah, proper? Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. All right. So
that's now just basically made their own individual methods, or their own classes for it.
Okay. And now when we go into our logger, we have that and.
And a little tip: if you click on iLogger again,
yeah.
See at the top where it says 3 inheritors. If you click that, there's our 3 different kinds of loggers that we have are implementing this particular thing. So you can jump back and forth between those. It kind of shows you which versions of a logger we happen to have built.
Okay. Now, before we move on, I want to see. So this is our booleans here. We've exposed those here. So technically, if I turn this off,
oh yeah, see if it should work. That's a good point.
We'll no longer be logging. So I'm going to turn both of them on. We're going to look for something that is cyan in my cascade of colorful logs. Once the project loads, there we go. All right, so looking for cyan, looking for cyan. It's not here. Now, to be fair, it might not actually be called. It should be called, but
you can throw a message in the awake just to say.
I was gonna say I'm gonna add another so yeah. To do this,
so you just write log now. That's just the keyword. We're just gonna use log.
Oh yes, right. Log. This is working. Mm-hmm. Says Anakin. It's working. All right, let's give it a try. Yeah, my late night streams are going to be much more colorful now. Okay, we have to restart the project.
So I noticed there's a lot of discussion about the pros and cons of a solution like this, and so I might as well dive into that briefly while we're doing this. Um, it's fair to say this might look like over engineering or unnecessary work or that kind of thing. But to be fair, what we're doing is we're building a logging solution in line now to solve a problem. In real life, you wouldn't be building it this way. You would be building as you go, and it wouldn't be this amount of stuff. But to put it another way, the reason why this kind of approach is powerful is because we get to defer decision making. So the worst thing a piece of software can be is what's called rigid. And that basically means if I decide to change my mind later, I have to rewrite parts of the code to change it. So imagine taking one of the older scripts and you want to make the log cyan for whatever reason, or you want to log to a TextMesh Pro. To do that, you have to edit code. And every time you edit code, you risk introducing bugs or what are called regressions. So you might think this feels like over engineering or unnecessary or whatever, but the truth is, I can decide in one place globally across a particular chunk of code to say, you know what, log everything. Actually, log nothing. Actually, log them a different color. And none of my code changes. So the risk of causing damage or breaking things is much smaller because if I break something by swapping out an implementation, I can just put the old one back. Like it's one line to say, use the new one. Actually, you know what? Use the old one. There's no breaking the old code because I don't have to change the old code. So the other part of it too is you're not making the decision. So if someone says, "Oh, actually, you're using the Unity logger for all of this. Do you know the Unity logger causes garbage? It's really bad for performance." I'm like, "Okay, I'll replace my iLogger with an iLog to something more efficient." And I can do that. I can make that decision later and I'm not tied down. If I was using the non bad for performance sounding complicated over engineered solution, I would have to go in and manually replace every single debug.log line in thousands of scripts to get that benefit of performance gain. But in this case, I have one place I can change it. So there's also other ways you can make this more performant. One thing we haven't gotten to yet is the Unity logger. Technically, there only needs to be one instance of it. So actually, you could make the Unity logger we've made a singleton, and then you can default all loggers to use that. In fact, we'll probably do that later once we get to the service management side of it. But my point is, whenever people look at this stuff and see that it's kind of unnecessary or confusing, the truth is, I think it's because it can look like that in isolation. But if you've ever worked on a project long enough to know that things change over time, think of the freedom we've just given ourselves. If we decide later that all logs need to go to some analytics platform or we want to move all of our logs to be on the web, we have one place to do it and we don't have to rewrite a single line in any one of our methods. Imagine trying to give yourself that power later, right? So whatever costs you think there are far outweighed by the benefits once this project scales and you need to start testing this stuff at a larger scale.
That makes sense to me. And while you were talking, one of the things I was thinking is I use the logs to remind myself where things happen, where important things happen. Usually I know that I'm going to have to come back to this later because, this type of project you can't just build start to finish. It has to go back and forth as you build everything up. So I was thinking, once we have it as a singleton that I just can, a static method I can call from any class, I would use the colors to say to myself, okay, this is the thing that, like, maybe I'd use magenta or something that you're going to have to come back to later. So, and I will type out, this is where we set up the scene. And then this is where we set up the player. This is where we load a bad guy. And with the color codes will be helpful to see. Kind of like what I did here. And then we'd have to have some sort of management that allows me to turn these on and off. Because the problem is if I turn it off and I forget where something lives, I need a way to turn it all back on without remembering which script it lives on in order to click these two buttons.
Yeah. So normally what you do actually is, because we haven't gotten that far yet, is right now the only information your logger has is that a message was sent. But what's much nicer is if you send the context of who sent the message and why. You can actually say, find all logs from object of type scene and show or hide them. And that means somewhere else you have this like configurer, and you could say, show me logs where it's got this word in it or where it comes from this base thing, or and you can decide those rules later. Um, like I said, if we're going to build like a big logging thing, that stuff gets way down the weeds a bit. First, I want to just demonstrate a few more things before we get to like the confusing parts.
Perfect.
In fact, actually, so the first thing is some people are saying this method versus the Unity way. Well, here's a spoiler alert for you. Let's actually look at how Unity does their logging. So, so if we pop back into our script for a second. So here's our debug.log that Unity does, right? What's this thing here on line 29 I'm seeing here? I think it's called an iLogger. Huh, it's almost like Unity internally is using something called an iLogger to log messages. It's weird, right? Now, and they have this thing called the log handler, called the debug log handler. So, fun fact, Unity's already doing this. Why am I not using Unity's way? Well, there's reasons for that later. But just to highlight this point, you can actually ignore all of my stuff and you can do it the way Unity does it, which is if we pop back over to the scene class, just to demonstrate, this is how Unity would propose you do this. But to show you it's not very different from what I'm doing. If you go above that line, on 940, you can write debug.logger, not debug.log. And that's the logger that Unity is using. So he's got to get the default Unity logger. So that's the logger class it's already using. But if you go one more dot and go dot handler, log handler, there's this thing called an iLog handler that Unity has provided that is a thing that handles logs. Now, if you F12 into that,
F12? You mean? Okay.
or yeah, sorry, click into it and go click it again to iLog handler on the left. Yep. This is their version of the same thing we just made. So rather than log and a method called log, they've got this thing called log handler and a message called log format. And so if we wanted to, we could write our own override for this called log to text label or log to web service. And you could swap out Unity's log handler and it would stop logging to the console and start logging to here instead. So Unity actually allows you to do this already because they're already using this abstracted method. Now, reason I don't like using it is because this kind of gets into a much wider thing, but right now all logged messages in Unity are in the form of a string message. And that's fine for 99.9% of logs. But one thing that I notice a lot of Unity devs, myself included, do is sometimes you want to log the status of a variable. Show me what the health value is. And what happens when you log health? Well, it spams messages, health 20, health 19, health 18, health, and it's not very useful. But if you had your own custom logger and one custom type on that was called log variable with a name for a variable and a number, you could actually say, you know what, if I get a variable log, don't send it to the console at all. Actually, write that over here in this little GUI window. So now variables could be logged very differently than message logs. That gets into we're not going to get there because that's like building a logging system. But my point is, once you've got control over logging, you outline in your script, log this message, log this status, log this as a variable. You don't define colors, you don't define types, you just say, hey, I have a variable, I want to know what it's doing, log the variable. And then once you've made all those decisions in your code, you can come along afterwards and say, okay, I have a place, a hook that tells me every time any script has requested to log a variable, what do I want to do with this information? Do I want to print it to the console normally? Do I want to generate a bar graph and outline its value over time? Do I want to show its current value on a little pop-up? Do I want to check if its value gets greater than a certain number and then do something else? The point is, you don't have to know the answer to what you want to do because you've given yourself a hook to ask that question later. I can decide later what I want to do with that information. But if you use debug.log, the answer is log to Unity, always and forever, no options to change that. So that separation, it isn't about, that's what architecture is for. Architecture, as a general rule, is to give you ways to make the code less rigid and so it's free to change without having to worry about the what changes. I think that's the bit that people miss. It's not a competing thing about one method or another. It's, is this going to change? Is there reasons for this to change? I can just put a little line there and say, hey, this is what I want. I don't care how it's done, but this is what I want. Later on, we'll figure out what that means later. And so that's all that boundary line is doing.
That seems reasonable. One of the things that I was thinking could be helpful for me in my scripts would be to define the color that I'm going to use. So for instance, color dot whoop. Nope. Color. There we go. So if I want to define, whoops, not clear, cyan, the color, then I can pass this right here, so that I can define a different color for each script.
Sure.
That might come in handy for me, with the way I know
But I
my
actually
stuff works.
So the way I actually like to do that, just to take it a little bit further, if you go right down to the bottom again and do call it public class log settings.
Here or outside?
Outside that one. Outside. Yeah. So public class log settings. Put the color in here. Okay. And also give it a size as well. So I forgot what the default is. I think it's like 12 or 14 or something.
Okay. No. It's probably 12.
Yep. And now above this on 117, square brackets and do serializable. Yep. And so now go all the way back up to the top, and instead of declaring a color, declare log settings. In fact, actually, you could even remove the is logging and put that in there as well. And you can delete the color for logs now, because we'll know by whether we've set a color in this one. Yeah, and scroll up again. And in fact, you don't even need to assign it to a new one. If you put a serialized field attribute over it, you can just put do a semicolon. I like to leave these private and just have serialized fields. Yeah, there you go. So now we have to edit our iLogger to take in log settings. So now just have a method in here called set settings or something. That might be clearer than, yeah, so void set settings.
And this is going to take in log settings.
Yep, settings, yeah, exactly. Semicolon, again, no implementation because this is just the contract.
That's right.
So now what it's going to do is it's going to tell us, hang on a second, you've changed the contract. So I, as a color logger, I don't know what that means anymore because you've now changed the rules of how I talk to the rest of the system. So it'll say you now need to add this new behavior. So if you add that, now what we can do, thankfully, because this is a pass-through, you can just write _logger.set settings and just pass it in.
So just pass everything through.
Exactly. Now, the other one isn't as straightforward. The Unity logger and the text logger are going to get a bit confused at us, so we're going to have to do something with that.
So let's see. I can look at my inheritors.
So he's going to have the same problem. In this case, we could say, oh, well, when I get the log settings, I'm going to set the text that labels color to be whatever the setting is. So if you just write _label, .color, you can then set the color to be whatever the log settings color happen to be. Yeah. And then likewise for the Unity one, Unity one's a bit harder. That's where you'd have to do the wrapped portion of that. So the question becomes, this is actually a different, I don't want to get into Liskov substitution. We'll leave it blank for now, but this is technically a bad idea. You shouldn't have an interface where something has a blank implementation, but we've got enough things to deal with today. So, if you're curious about why I don't like what this is, there's something called Liskov substitution. It's one of the solid principles. We're moving on. Okay, back to the scene class. And now, you can also move that out now.
That's right.
Yeah, and now these are a lot simpler now. We can just basically say...
New logger just by itself, right?
Well, that's if we don't want to use the colors. If we do want to use the colors, we have to use the color logger. Or what we can do is we can make the color logger the default. So right now, that's a pass-through one. I would say in your case, you're probably using the colorful logs all of the time, or at least the option to do so. So what we'll do is we'll simplify that. This is how I would do it. I would use decorators and get fancy. We don't need to do that. So I would say in the new Unity logger, if we pop back, if you actually open the color logger first, you can just copy that 22 down to 24, or 22, 23, sorry, 22 and 23. pop back over to our normal Unity logger. Paste that in there in log function on 14. Yeah, and then swap the log message so it logs the log with color.
Swap
log
the log
color instead of that. Yeah, right there.
Oh, log color. I see. Got it.
Yeah. And now there isn't currently a color variable. So what you want to do is store that. So the way you can do that is either create a color variable or store the settings, whichever you prefer. So I would say probably store the settings. So log settings underscore settings.
Wait. Where?
So if you copy inside the round brackets there in set settings, if you just copy those two words, log settings, log settings.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the incoming setting. So you have to, well, you can't change the contract there. You have to store it in say 8, for example.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And then you'd assign one to the other. So you would say this dot log settings equals log settings. But I don't like the this, so I use underscore, but whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. So now we've cached whatever settings have come in, and now you have access to those when doing the stuff on line 15, and you could now say log settings.color.
Ah, got it.
So now what we can do is we don't need to have a dedicated color logger that wraps this one. This one also just knows how to handle colors now. So if you want, you can rename the, oh, that's Unity logger. Yeah. So now you can just delete that and just have Unity logger as a single thing.
Just like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely easier.
There we go.
Okay. So now to test this, just to make sure we got, a bug. Is logging.
Oh, he is logging.
So this is going to be.
Oh, actually, that's a good point. We need to do that as well, actually. So pop back over to the iLogger again. We need to actually support that now. So inside of the Unity logger, we actually have a Boolean flag in the settings, if you remember, if we should be logging. So above this, on line 15, we can say if log settings that is logging. If not is logging, return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're not is logging, then we'll return.
Exactly, yeah. So now the logger itself decides whether he happens to be logging. So you can actually delete that line too.
Okay. And so colorful logs, we can delete this Boolean entirely.
Yeah, by default. By default, it entirely comes down to whatever settings you have in your log settings.
Well, there's log settings.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. We can change the color now to a nice purple, and we'll change the size.
We're not currently using the size. We haven't changed. We haven't actually put the size yet. But
we can do that part.
We should do. Yeah, we can do that next. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see this working. I need to get a button to bring Anakin Skywalker up every time it's working. Nope, it's not working.
Oh well, the script is off. That doesn't help. It's literally turned off.
Oh, that's my bad. That could be why. I may have accidentally clicked it. Let's try again. Don't forget to like and subscribe, everybody. Nope. Hey, the scene's still off. All right. That's weird.
If your object throws an exception in the awake function, Unity will turn it off automatically. So something in awake is probably being null.
Okay. Scene. So it's this that's throwing the issue.
We are assigning it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're not using log settings. We need to set the settings. That's what's throwing an exception. So now that we have settings, we've actually assigned those settings after we've initialized it. So in the awake function, after you've created the logger on 36, the next line should be logger.set settings, log settings.
Ah, okay, like that.
Yeah.
Okay. just clicked it twice, so I may have started and stopped at the same point. And I still,
That's so
Jason,
confusing. Yeah.
am not using the
I noticed.
command key.
I wasn't gonna bring it up. I was gonna bring it up.
Somebody brought it up in the chat earlier, so they know. They're watching. They're watching. They're paying attention. So it's working. It's giving us white, not our beautiful purple, though. It's not sure why it's not giving us this lovely color.
Are we logging before we print the message? Before we set the settings, rather?
We are not.
Oh, we are setting the settings. Are we double checking we're using the settings?
No. So this just goes to log message. So that's not there.
Let's have a look at the where we're building that line again. In the Unity logger.
So we set the settings here. Do we need to call this from somewhere?
No, it should be fine.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, is a checkbox for is logging is true? Are we actually logging, or is that a false positive? It is. Okay.
It is true. Yeah.
Oh, see where it says equals, and there's the I forgot this. This is one of those annoying things. On line 19, see where it says color equals.
Yeah.
So the value that's returned. Sorry, the next equals the one for color. No, equals over on the same line. That one.
This one.
Yeah, right there. So the value that comes back from toString RGBA or RGB is the hex code color without the pound sign. So you need to put a pound sign in yourself. I forgot about that.
There we go. See, now, my method of solving that would have been to put a whole bunch of debug logs and spit everything out until something pops up as obviously fake or wrong.
Well, luckily I've done this a few times, so it's familiar with me.
The debugging is the fun part, right? That's the most exciting part about game development, right?
Everyone knows when you don't get to make any progress and you spend all of your time staring at code which should be working.
There it is. Beautiful purple color. Purple is my favorite color, by the way.
So now we want to probably add the size as well, so you can control that.
We would. So let me see if I can do this without
go for
asking you. So I'm going to talk it through for everyone's sake. Scream at me in the chat if I say something wrong. So in log settings, we have this size. It defaults to 12. On our scene, I can go to log settings and log settings. Log settings. Okay. Oh yeah. So I'm going to set this in the inspector to something huge, 24. And then back in Writer, our Unity logger needs to set the size to that. So we have the size already. It's being passed through log settings. And so I need to add the size here outside of the color. I think if I remember correctly, size equals size? No. Log settings dot size. And then close that, and then I believe it has to be outside, so they have to like a Russian doll.
They make pairs, yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter which order, as long as you can have one inside the other as long as they pair correctly.
Yeah, okay. So technically that should work. I've said that a lot of times and it doesn't work, but we'll see. It is a shame that the stream can't restart if it crashes. That is a shame.
There's no way to just redirect people.
It's working. It's just too big now. It broke the console. So,
Well, I guess we
Excellent.
have to go into the code and fix the. Oh wait, we don't have
Yeah.
to do that because it's a nice exposed setting now.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So we'll make that 14. So slightly bigger for the future. Um, all right. So this has been very helpful, I think, because now my scripts can all have this. The next step for me, and I don't think we necessarily have to do it in the stream. We could probably answer questions or do something else as well. But my next step will be to create some way to globally control all of these. And what you were suggesting earlier was looking for all classes that implement iLogger or Unity Logger, whatever it was that we were doing, right? Um,
Yeah,
Unity
there's a
Logger.
number of ways to do this, all with various pros and cons. My preferred solution is to basically pick a simple logger and default all scripts to that. But if you want to, like, I don't normally actually, funnily enough, go for the global logger that you're describing, because I know this sounds like a weird thing, but if I wanted custom logs per script, I would put a behavior on this object, and it would change the logger that the logger is using. So let me just show you that, and then we'll. Yeah, so this is a real quick thing. Go to the
Okay.
scene object, the scene class there, and it may seem like a small thing, but if you just do a public void set logger,
Uh, Up here.
yeah, anywhere in the scene class.
Okay.
hmm You can take in your iLogger.
Okay.
Yep, and then just assign underscore logger to iLogger. Oh, sorry, it's logger on 13. Yeah, it's logger equals iLogger.
Yeah. All right.
So this is a small thing, but it means now, anytime you want globally, you can grab this object and replace its logger. So imagine if one of the scene objects was causing you issues, you could like literally write a quick script and say, get the logger.set logger, write purple logs, just for this one object right now for testing. And you can do that without editing the code. You know what I mean?
I think so.
So this is just an exposed ability now for something else to set this logger. The reason
So
I
it's
do
still going to
this
set itself though.
it will set itself, but this lets you override what it's been set as.
Okay.
And the reason this is useful is you could, this is a whole other way I would do this. You're extending from mono behavior, right? And remember we did with the editor, we had the custom editor scripts and it has a base editor. I would have my own base mono behavior that has logging stuff. And subsequently, any mono behavior which wants to implement from, my mono behavior or Legend of the Stones mono behavior, by default gets all of this stuff for free. It gets the logger, gets the settings, gets the stuff, and that way I don't have to think about it again.
Mm-hmm.
Again, though, I don't want to go too down too many tangents. There's just a couple of small things we need to deal with. So one of them being right now you can set a null logger and throw exceptions like we saw earlier. We don't want that to happen. So so first thing we have to do is make sure that we can't cause errors with this, because as we've rightly figured out, if errors happen in the logger, how do you ever find out if it's logging, if it's breaking the logs, right? So there's a couple of things we can do to make this more robust. So first thing is, if we go back to our Unity logger, so one thing that's causing issues here is from line 16 down to line 20 or so, we're relying on this thing called an log settings. And if the log settings happens to be null, not provided, or some other error, we're in trouble because it means it's going to throw errors and exceptions doing this. So it's usually a better idea not to actually take this object and pass it around. It's usually better to unpack its contents. So what we're really saying is a Unity logger actually needs 3 bits of information. It needs the color, it needs the is logging, and it needs the font size. So I would just make those 3 variables on line 8. They are the things that this logger needs.
So
just make those 3, yeah, exactly, yeah. Color and the size and the is logging. Yeah, and now on line 15, we could say if log settings is null, return. So if there isn't any log settings, don't throw an error, just don't do anything.
So if we pass, okay.
Mm-hmm. But if we did pass successful log settings, rather than storing the settings themselves, we'll just unpack its contents into our variables that we care about.
Okay, so color would be equal to log settings dot color.
Color, yeah, exactly. That way, we're not beholden now to them being accurate settings. If settings aren't there, whatever, it'll just use the default. There's other ways to do this. We could have just cached a version of settings and various things, but we're keeping it simple.
Oops. All right.
And now you can delete 7 and 21. And of course, now it doesn't know what those things are, so you can get rid of the prefix for the log settings because we actually have them locally now. Oh, they're actually stored on this object, so you don't need the prefix of log settings at all. It can just be is logging, color, and size. And last but not least, you probably want to set some defaults on 7, 8, and 9.
That's right.
Otherwise, you'll be size 0 with no color, which will be a bit hard to see. So that now works, but there is, I guess, one last thing, which is that you probably want to have some ability to not log things. So here's the thing. If you currently wanted to not log something, there's no way for you to do that because you need to provide a logger. And if you set it null, it'll throw an exception, right? Because there'll be no logger, it'll try to log and it'll error out. But here's the kind of weird thing about using a system like this. What happens if you had something called an iLogger that just did nothing? It just had no behavior, right? Every time someone calls it, it's there, it exists, it just chooses not to do anything. So that's a way for you to have loggers not log, but yet not have to check for null every time you want to check if a logger exists, which is better for performance. So we would just create a type of logger that is in no logs. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So we have a Unity logger. What if we just made a no logger? So we can make another type of logger called no logging, or no logger, or null logger.
It'll be a whole new class.
Whole other class, yeah. It's a logger that just does nothing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is actually called
methods.
Yeah, and this is actually called the null object pattern. And you can just leave those two blank because it doesn't need to do anything. And now we can use this whenever we don't want to log it. Now there's one thing, we don't need to create a new one for every time because this actually has no state. So nothing in this changes. So from a performance perspective, we can just have this be a singleton. So this is, here we can just make a custom, I use a particular singleton syntax, so this might get a bit messy, but just trust me on this one. So go down below log.
Below.
So next line.
Log.
Sorry, end of this class here, right there. So write null logger or static space null logger space underscore instance. So that's saying there's a single static null logger. Now we want to get a reference to that. So above this, you can write public static null logger again, and a capital I instance. And this is where it gets weird. Do a space and then an arrow. Yeah. Sorry, equals and then a that. Yeah, so arrow. Now write underscore instance space double question mark equals. Yeah, space new null logger. Now I know that's a bit wacky, so we're gonna pause on this for a second. So what this does is it says the null logger object has a single static thing called an instance. If you try to get the instance and it is null, it will set it to a new null logger and return that. If it does already exist, it'll return the one that was there already. All this really means is if I ever, anywhere in my code, write the line null logger.instance, it'll start out with nothing, it'll assign it the first time, and it'll forever then on use that one. So in memory, no matter how many times I call or reference or use a null logger, it will always be one logger. And that means from a performance perspective, it's far more efficient, but it also means I never have to check for null again. If I always make sure the logger returned is either one I've assigned or it's one of these null loggers, then I'm golden. It'll always log to something even if that something does nothing, if that makes any sense.
Sort of,
Right?
yeah. So this part right here in more verbose language is saying, so capital A instance is going to
Mhm.
return this private
Yes.
underscore instance. But if that is null, then
Hmm.
return this and
Assign
assign
it
it at
to
the same
that and
time.
then return it. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, if it's null, then assign and return. Okay.
Hmm.
Does this have a special name? Question question equal?
So I know the two brackets is the null coalescing, and then the single and the quotes is called the Elvis operator. I can't. This is actually brand new. This is new to like the last version. The
Oh,
older version of this, I'll actually show you two versions, just so people might be more familiar with this. If you delete past underscore instance again, or actually yeah, you can copy and paste it. Why not? We'll do it two different ways just to show it. Yeah. So write underscore instance double yeah. So leave that one. Leave those two. Delete the equals.
this equal?
Sorry, other one, the other side. Yeah. Now put open and close round brackets around new null logger. So open a round bracket there and close it around there. Yeah. And now on the inside of that, just in between the round bracket and new, write underscore instance equals. So this is the long form version of exactly the same thing. And they'll actually try to tell you can change it. What this is saying
Ah,
is return instance. If instance is null, instance equals a new null logger, return that. So that's the exact same thing. It's just because it's such a common pattern, they've given it a single assignment operator.
cool. And then with writer, and I'm assuming
Yeah,
others do the same thing.
oh, compound assignment. I guess that's what the null coalescing. Okay, I know there's the null coalescing operator, but I was under that impression that's just the double question mark. Unless, yeah, there's so many names for these. It's hard to keep track. Anyway, so that now works. That's now your single null use of that. Now here's where we have to get a little bit crazier back in our scene class. So right now, assign the logger ourselves. So we assign it either here, or if you scroll up into our awake function, we're assigning it by assigning it there on 41. So what we can do instead, so this might be a bit confusing too, so we'll have to stop after this one. Find underscore logger. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make, so I like to move this right to the bottom of the class. So I don't know for you, but for me, it's Control Shift Alt and press down.
Control Shift Alt and down.
You can just hold down, it'll go all the way to the bottom of the class. It'll just zip its way down. There you go. So what I like to do is just above this, what we're going to do is private logger with a capital L. Mm-hmm. So now do an arrow here at the end of this one, and then write underscore logger space double question marks space no logger dot instance. No, yeah, you go. So what this says is every time I call logger, either give me the logger that's here, or give me the null one, so I don't do anything. So now it'll never be null. If I call logger, under no circumstance will that object ever be null. It'll either be the one I've assigned or the blank one. So I never need to check for null. I can just say logger.do stuff, and forever and above, it'll always work to some degree.
Okay. And then, and that means when I set
Exactly. From now
here,
on, you can't because that's a get only. So you're correct in saying you have to set it there, but we now use it using the capital L version. So in the place down below in our log function, we're going to use the capital L version from now on. So in this method here, yep.
this
So
method here.
F12 on that, yep.
Oh, I see. Ah,
So yeah, you can capital L for logger. So that now means the logger every script that has this will now default to logging to nothing unless provided elsewise. If it is provided, then it'll override that setting. So now that this works, one thing that I would probably do is I would take all this logging junk and I would move it to some base class and have scene implement the base class. So you don't have to see it in this class every time. And it means we can quickly give it to other behaviors.
okay. So,
So
to do that, okay, I'm lost now. I don't know actually how to move this to its own.
yeah, well, the code generation on this can be a bit confusing, so we'll probably just do it manually. So if you scroll up to the top, you've got this thing scene which implements mono behavior. Mono behavior is Unity's thing. We need to do just like they did with the editor, our own version of mono behavior. So you can call it whatever you want. It can be LOS mono behavior, or well, we're not gonna do it here yet. We'll just come up with a name first, whatever you want to call it. My behavior, my mono behavior, LOS mono behavior, base behavior, whatever name you want to give it. This will be the new thing every one of your mono behaviors will extend from instead of the Unity mono behavior.
Okay, so we'll call it LOS mono behavior.
Cool. So let's go all the way to the bottom and make ourselves an LOS mono behavior.
So class LOS. How about, is that correct?
Sure, yeah. It'll complain because there's no LOSs, but you can add it to your custom dictionary. We'll do that in a second.
Okay.
So this will implement mono behavior. Yep. And now if you click on LOS mono behavior and alt enter, it'll tell you that it doesn't like the name, but there's a custom dictionary that you can go to. Where is it? Or actually, inspect inconsistent naming. We'll just do that one. And you could say add LOS to the abbreviations list. Right, you're smart enough to know that you've got yourself a custom abbreviation there.
I see.
So now you can move that out to its own file. And now it should be just as easy as right at the top, instead of using mono behavior, use LOS mono behavior. Cool. That doesn't do anything yet, but we now have our own wrapper class. So now everything log-ish, you can just drag and move into the LOS mono behavior. All of that plumbing that we put in place.
So this, and then that would also, let me just delete it from here. And that would also mean all of this as well, right?
Yep.
And this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, we're going to do even more.
So we'll leave that one, leave the one where it says log there, but yeah, setting stuff. So what we'll do now is go to the LOS mono behavior. Now what you want to do is make line 14 protected.
What does protected mean?
So protected means, so everything private here can only be seen by literally this script, LOS mono behavior. Protected means anyone who extends this, so like our script, can see that. So we can still call log even though it can't see it because it's hidden back here. We're sort of saying, hey, people who extend me can see it, but I'm not public. So somebody else can't write scene.log, but scene itself can call log on me because I know my own sub-objects. So protected means part of my kind of chain, but not publicly exposed.
Okay.
It'll make more sense in a second once we drag in we need the underscore logger as well. The underscore logger and the capital L logger at the bottom of the scene script.
Oh, that's right. See, we put them at the bottom and I'm suddenly like, where are they? They're gone.
Cool. So now
Delete
logging
them.
works. Yeah, you can delete that and delete those stuff. And so now, in theory, we should. Yeah, so what we'll do is here, we can just delete those two for a second. We'll come back to that. So now this is just a script which just writes the word log somewhere. So it's no different than what you were previously doing with debug.log. Now it's just the word log. But this script won't log anything because right now its settings are to not log anything. Right?
They are?
Yeah, because we've turned those off. So the default is, so we'll follow the chain of logic now. If you click log and F12 on that, on 38, I say F12, but whatever your shortcut is, it'll say, oh, you want to log something? Well, I'm going to use my logger to log something. Now, when you call logger, it'll default to nothing. And it'll say, hey, actually, you don't have one at the moment. So I'm going to give you the null logger. So every script automatically, even though you write log everywhere, won't log anything. So you now have the log information being sent, but nothing's happening. So that means you could very quickly right now go through any scripts you want, swap the word mono behavior to LOS mono behavior, remove the debug dot from all the word logs, and everything will work exactly the same, but no logs will be sent. until you go in and then configure how logs should be sent. So that now will suddenly clean up your logs automatically just by replacing monobehavior with LOS monobehavior.
Okay, and then at some other script.
Yeah, at some point we can assign whatever exactly. We can choose that if you want like the default version of this. What I like to do is a starting point. If you go back to our base monobehavior again, LOS monobehavior. So here's where what we can do is, again, it might get a bit weird, but so on line 11, and Dora, I'll explain what virtual means in a second. So do protected virtual void, and then write configure logs. Yep. And then by default, we're going to set underscore logger equal to new Unity logger with those log settings. Oh, sorry, it's set. We didn't put it in the constructor. We have a logger.set settings on the next line.
Oh. There we go.
There's subtle things here that are different the way I would do it in my own project, so I'm getting confusing myself. But functionally, it's the same idea. So now we have a method here which will configure logs. Now you can choose how you want to deal with this. Personally, the way I like to, again, we're getting into kind of odd territory. I don't want to get too confusing. But the way I would normally do this is on line 11, I would override awake. So I would just do void awake here in this class. Yeah. And I would set this to virtual. So if you did want to override it, you could. And this is where it gets a bit weird, but I'll explain in a second. Protected virtual void awake. I'll let you do it. Otherwise, okay, so this is going to get a bit weird. So on line 11, write protected abstract initialize or setup or something like that. This is like the equivalent of awake, but like setup, yeah. Void setup, sorry. Yeah, round bracket, semicolon. Now, no behavior on this one. This is just a template. So to delete those two and put a semicolon at the end.
Delete. Oh, I see. I see. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on line 5, set that to abstract. I'll explain all of this in a second, but we'll just fill it in. So, public abstract class.
Abstract. Yep.
Now on line 16, what you want to do is configure logs. Yeah. So right there, write configure logs, and then call setup. So what all of this meant is, rather than calling awake in any script which implements LOS monobehavior, LOS monobehavior does his own awake. He wants to awake because he's got his own stuff to set up, which in this case is the logger. So he'll say, I will set myself up, do logging, and then after I'm finished setting myself up, I will let you set yourself up by calling a setup function. And what this means is, just like the interface, if we pop back over to scene is now red. It'll say, oh, you're an LOS monobehavior? Well, part of that process is setting yourself up. You're missing that. So if you implement that, this is now the equivalent of an awake function, but it's an awake function that happens after the base class has decided to do its awake. So you would just move your awake stuff in there, and that means that anything that happens globally will happen in the other one first, then this stuff gets called. That might be a bit confusing. I don't know if this is too much out of the way you normally do stuff, but this gives you a lot more freedom, because it means if there's stuff you want to set up globally across all of your monobehaviors, you can do it in the base class and then, come back to this. So yeah, and now you can delete the awake in the scene class. And so now, with all of that in place, by default, every single script that implements LOS monobehavior will now log to the console with whatever color and settings you've set up in the inspector. But you could override it on line 22, for example. If you wrote override, you don't need to do this, but this gives you the freedom to do this. On a per script basis, you could write here, configure logs, and you could completely change how this one script handles logs. You could say, actually, this one script, it logs to the web, or it logs with other services or other stuff. So we don't need that, but this is the freedom we've now given ourselves. Every single script now has checkbox for on and off, color changing options, size changing options, and if you want per individual script control, you can do that, and it's all pre-managed for you. And if you want to change how all of them work, you just change in the base class in LOS mono behaviors logging how that works. So here's the cool thing: with very little effort on your part now. Oh, there's probably a. Oh, it doesn't recognize the syntax. I'm guessing.
Weird. Is it because I'm in an
So
older version of Unity?
if you are, yeah, so you might have to use the longer form version that I showed you, which was the double question mark and then round brackets. So yeah, it's the same thing. It's not quite as tidy, but it does exactly the same thing. So
No, there was
underscore
something
instance
else.
equals.
Wasn't
Yeah,
there
you
something
have to
else?
sign the instance in there. Yeah, underscore instance equals.
Oh, yes. There we go.
There we go. So now here's let's just double check everything still runs because we did a lot of changes, and then hopefully the magic will happen with the next line. This should be the cool part.
This is working.
Okay, so now for the magic. Pick any other script that does logs. And let's see how hard it is to quote unquote refactor or migrate to this new system.
Okay, this one should be fine enough. So to do that, I'm going to first stop this and then change to LOS mono behavior.
Yep.
And then I need to implement the setup, missing members. And my awake, I will move to that.
Yep.
Delete my awake. And then all my debug.log. So
You can automate this. If you just do it, yeah, exactly. I was gonna say find all and replace. That's what I do.
I always forget where the find all is here in Writer.
Yeah, the writer's really annoying. It's not as easy as it used to be in Visual Studio. I think it's the difference between Control F and Control Shift F. I think it's whatever
maybe that's
variant of that is.
There we go. No.
Okay,
nope.
that's
not
maybe,
it.
Maybe it's some other combination. Writer, find and replace. Anybody know? Let me know. I don't remember all. Control Shift H, apparently.
Control Shift H. Nope. Unless no.
Oh, there's a replace. Oh, there is. Yeah,
Oh,
replace in the
replace
bottom
in
right.
path.
It's just not very intuitive.
Replace all.
Yeah.
Here goes nothing. Whoa. Is it changing it everywhere in the entire?
Yeah, I think you've selected for the entire project, so that might be a bit
Abort.
confusing. So abort that. Yeah.
Abort. Undo. All right.
I think you have to say in this script only. There's a checkbox there for in this script only. Yeah, see solution project directory or scope. So click scope there on the top, on the bar just above that line. That yeah. So scope is the one you want. There you go.
Current file. Much easier. Okay. Replace all. 12. Okay, that's more reasonable.
A reasonable setting. Yeah.
All right. So now that should work. So if I go to my game, which is a main controller for the game, that's why I named it game. We're going to make log settings. We'll make this a nice... That is a bug, by the way, that I think affects only Macs on the later versions of Unity 2019 and above. Oh no. Let's see. Log error.
Oh, we haven't supported log. Oh, that's the beauty. We can add that right now. So if we pop back over to, let's go to our base class. So
this is our base
go
class?
to our... Yeah, so what we need to do is make a log error function. So we can say we currently have log on 31. We can have a protected void log error. Yeah, it'll also take in an object message. And it'll defer to logger.log error, which doesn't exist, but we'll make it. So just like 33, only log error.
Oh, log error. Sorry.
Yep. It'll tell us that doesn't exist. And if you click on log error and click Alt Enter for me, which is create method, and then that adds it to the contract. Now everybody who implements the contract is like, hang on a second, what does log error mean? I don't know what that means. I have to do something with that. You just have to make sure the other implementers support that behavior now. So null will do nothing, as no surprises. Yep.
And these can actually be removed entirely.
Yeah, you can delete the color logger. We're not using that. Or the text one too. That was just for testing.
I'll just do that for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But just to highlight, right, part of the freedom of this, imagine if you wanted every error message to not use the error thing, but to actually use the warning thing, but then be prefixed with square brackets of the word error. You could now do that in one place right here, right? See how freeing that is? Decision where, like, you can decide, actually, you know what? I only want to log errors which start with the word, player or something. You can have complete freedom now for everything that comes in, how you want to handle it. In this case, we're just going to route it around, but you can change it.
Yeah, and I could even say, ignore the is logging. Maybe I say if it's
exactly
log error,
always log errors,
want
even
it.
if it is. Yeah. Now, the way we'd really do that is using an integer, and that integer would go up 1, 2, 3 for levels. You'd say log just info, log info and warnings, log info, warnings, and error, or just, you know what I mean? You'd actually give yourself the freedom to control levels. So you can actually say, set this to only the errors, or errors and warnings, or errors and warnings and logs. We won't do that right now, but you could say we can add that in later and notice how it would just retroactively support every script that we add that to.
Okay, so technically here I'm taking the same color, the same size. Now I'm doing log warning, but I can put in front of this error.
Yeah, if you like.
Or would I do this would be the faster way, is that right?
Dollar signs in front of the quotes. Although I would say in this case, for sanity reasons, I would stick with log error on these because errors are supposed to be errors. So I would say log error for errors and log warning for warnings, just to keep things sane. You can change these later, but I would make, or first pass, I would also, while we're here, you might as well add log warning, right? Because that's the other default one that Unity provides, just so you have all three. And another unrelated part of this, which is quite nice, is because we now have a place that defines how logging works. If you decided you wanted an in-game console log, all we'd have to do is create a type of iLogger called, UI console logger. And we could very easily make that feature without having to change how any of the logs are written.
All right. So now game should no longer have that issue. Wherever it was, right there. Use the keyboard to press play.
Oh, apparently we're only logging the color in error. It's really worth the check. I forgot the message.
Oh, really? No, we're logging the message. There's error.
Oh, there you go.
In that color. Yeah. So all these pinks are coming from game. That's good to know. That's helpful.
Cool.
For me, at least.
If you want to turn them off too, like you want to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I just uncheck the game one for a second, and then I can go back to working on other stuff, and it's suddenly less logs. You know what I mean?
Okay. And I think for me, at some point, I will probably build a global thing just to keep track of all the different things.
And what you can do, one thing that you can do too, which is maybe a bit overkill, but it's something I've done in the past with stuff, is where you can add extensions to the top. You've got your RPG tools and tools up there at the top menu.
Yeah.
You could make your own tools menu called logging, and you could have a bunch of keyboard shortcuts. So you could have something like Shift LB or Shift something like that, which will say for each script in my hierarchy that is of type LOS monobehavior, call the logging function and set the boolean for is logging the true or false. So you can have a global button that would just toggle on and off all of them or do different things. So there's lots of ways you can control this. Or you could, like, if you wanted to get really crazy with this, you could build a custom window that pops up, which gets all of the scripts with iLogger in the name, or which has the iLogger, lists them all, and then lets you type in a filtered search, and it'll only allow loggers that are coming from classes with your filter in it to show logs. So I would probably go as far as to have something where it's like I can type in a word like player, and only classes with the word player in the name are allowed to log at the moment while I'm testing. And suddenly you've got this complete freedom where you could say only log things that have stat somewhere in the message or title, only log that, and now you can like completely go crazy and completely limit whatever's showing to the logs.
Amazing. No,
So that's architecture for you. That's generally the point of what I was saying, is that it's like you can keep going further and further with this, but for now at least that gives you a way that per script you can change color, size, and that all the options you want to do. You never have to wrap it in brackets again. You can just write the log and figure it out later, and it gives you all of that control from an architectural standpoint. So that's why I was a bit frustrated when I saw the last the first time.
This is the value. Oh, let me do this, then we can look at each other. This is the value of you watching my streams and getting pissed off at my code.
Yeah, exactly.
It works really well.
What's great is I always watch your streams as soon as I'm like frustrated in my own projects, and it's like, oh, I can watch your stuff because it's more relaxing. Because whatever problem I'm solving, clearly I can't solve it. That's why I'm frustrated. So watching your stuff, it's like, these I know. These are things I can solve. So that always makes me feel better to see problems that are
calm you down
in my wheelhouse. Exactly. Yeah.
Center your head on what you can control, sort of.
At least exactly like we talked about. Yeah, have your control, align my cutlery, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's right. So I want, if we have a little more time, there are probably some questions. I've been sort of scanning the chat.
We've covered a lot there. Like without going too crazy with this, I will say some of the keywords we've covered there. If people want to Google further on these topics, we've made null object pattern. We've used a strategy pattern. We've used decorators. We have covered so many more. So there's like even just that little bit we've done there that represents an awful lot of architectural concepts, inversion of control to a degree, and other different things. So there's a lot of buzzwords to Google around that, but I'd say the main one would be the null object pattern. That's what the dot instance bit was. And then the other one is the general concept of strategies. The strategy is, hey, I don't deal with logging. I have a strategy that is, the strategy I use when logging comes up is whatever one was given to me. It's like if I shoot a gun, I could just shoot a gun, or I could say, use the tool in my hand. The strategy is tool.use. Is the tool a gun? Then it shoots. Is the tool a rake? Then I do gardening, right? So it doesn't matter. And in this way, we said that with logging. We've said, here's a tool. It's a thing that knows how to take a message and do something with it. If you wanted to, you could plug into the other end of that Microsoft text-to-speech, and every log that comes in gets read on a second in your speakers, right? You can see how there's the strategy of how you handle that's completely irrelevant from the contract you've made, which says, here is messages I am sending into the system. Somebody figure it out. So that's the strategy that we're using, that's the strategy pattern to separate out our intention from the implementation.
Well, I think that concept is something that has been slowly sinking into my head, and like when I do my own scripts, I find myself, I guess, using those strategies without necessarily realizing it, and starting to recognize when I'm using those strategies. And that's been very helpful. And I know recently there have been some stuff where I'm coding and things just work, and I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's because this and maybe some other strategies that I've been picking up from you and Jason and other people I've been watching, where suddenly it's become very easy to say, oh, this window needs to display this text, and with one line I can just make that window display this text just like this other window displays this text, and I don't have to redo the work. It's just a single line saying, show whatever it is over there, do that here too, and then it just does. So
yeah, it's a good feeling too, because it starts to make things easier to reason about, and sort of the fact that you don't have to think about it now, right? Whenever you write log something I don't care. It doesn't. I don't have to go in and start doing things with text and labels and whatever.
Yeah. And then Nicholas is asking, is this a logging system you use often?
Um, so not specifically this way, but the principle of I know a script wants to log, so I have some way of assigning a logger. I do that every time. I just don't do the base class method I did for you. I did the base class version because if you do the base class, you can do what we just did and instantly replace all of them with ease because of the way the architecture is currently set up. If it was the way I would do it, I wouldn't have a base class for it because the base class is still technically hard coding it just a different way. The way
Mm-hmm.
I would do it is I would have the logger passed in when I create the object. So when I create a new object, I would call initialize or setup or something, and it will take in the logger in the setup function like we did, only the setup is called externally. So if I was creating a bunch of objects, I would instantiate them, call setup, pass in the logger, and that way I have something else create a logger and give all of them the exact same logger. So I could say, when creating enemies, give them enemy logger. When creating players, give them player logger. When creating weapons, give them weapon logger. And now I have a lot more fine-grained control over those things. But the general principle of I have within me an iLogger, and the iLogger does logs. I do that every time, and I do that for pretty much everything. I do that for movement. I do that for um, getting objects. I do that for any scenario where there's like a configuration of something. It's the same idea. It's inversion of control. If there's a low level detail I want to change, like where do my logs go, I will invert that decision so somebody higher up the chain can make it, and I just say I log stuff. I do the same with gizmos as well. If I'm drawing like gizmos in the scene, I don't say gizmo draw sphere color red blah blah blah. I would say draw a circle, write some text, draw a line between A and B, draw another line, and then something gets passed in that says, oh, you want to draw a line? Well, I draw all lines in red. I draw all circles at this size, and all the text gets drawn in the scene using a label or something. And if I want a different gizmo drawer, I can hand it a different one that says, oh, me, I draw all lines actually as dotted lines, and they're all purple. And that way, whoever decides that later can be done after the fact. So again, inversion of control strategies I do all the time. The specific thing we landed on here, there's been some compromises for the sake of getting us where we need to be.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, there's not as many people as the normal game dev show, so there are fewer questions. Um,
Well, hey, I
and
mean, I'm not gonna
yeah.
lie. There's other areas of your code I'd love to dive into, so it's up to you.
Oh man. No, we should do that. We should do that sometime. But I
We
think
did cover a lot here. It might be a good place
we,
to stop on that one. Yeah.
it's probably a good place to stop. I'm gonna have to go through and update all of the scripts to the LOS mono behavior,
Yeah.
and I'm probably gonna start thinking, well, what else can I add to this
To
base
that base class,
class?
yeah, now that you have it.
Yes.
One thing that I will eventually, just as a hint for what the next thing we'll cover is the next big issue that I want to solve is the way you handle your dictionaries and lists of items. You do a lot of this dot items dot whatever. There's a general pattern we can do to make that whole process smoother. I think I actually
Okay.
covered it with you before. It's the enumerator stuff, and there's some other kind of tools in there. But
Yes.
to kind of officially codify that as a list of stuff, um, there's other stuff too. Like you do some stuff with selections, and we can make an actual class for things that are selectable that can be turned on or off. That way, you never have to write the if it's null, do this. If it's been selected, there's like whenever there's a repetitious chunk of behavior, it's very easy to isolate that. And in my case, list of things where you iterate through them, cloning items, and selecting a thing from a list of things are three things you do enough that we
Yeah.
can like choose a solution and replace it globally across for that.
Okay. That sounds good. I can't mute
As for
myself, by the way, so I apologize.
Engage said I should do clean code videos. Actually, my next video is a clean code video, but I started writing it and I showed a few people, and it looked like it was getting too complicated. So I had to stop and dial it back. It was supposed to be out today, but I was like, you know what? I need to reevaluate this because I thought it was a simpler topic than it was. Um, and so I'm going to try to explain it better. It's a concept called guard clauses, and well, the lines of code, it's just three lines. They look very similar to each other. It'll be an interesting one. The problem is the reasoning behind it starts to get into graph theory, And if I'm trying to explain why this line of code is different than this line of code because how the compiler treats your code like a graph, I need to stop and figure out how to explain this better. So whatever the next video is, it'll be a good one. It'll just I might need a few more days to rack my head around how I'm going to simplify the explanation.
Yeah, William says give Andrew some homework. You realize he has
Yeah,
given
yeah.
me
He
homework.
that now LOS mono behavior. He's got hundreds of scripts that all have to replace that, do the debug log replacement. There's enough in that. I'll be happy enough knowing that once Andrew's put all of that in, he'll be able to control those checkboxes, and then I'll at least feel better. Although I now realize the one downside to all of this is now he's going to add more colors to every log, so everything will be slightly different shades of yellows and purples, and it's going to look even worse. But at least to my knowledge, if I say, "Can you turn off all of that crap?" you can. That's the difference. So.
Yeah, well, I will have to build a global on-off switch. But yes, they're going to be very colorful. It's going to make a lot of sense up here, but it won't make sense necessarily to everybody else.
But again, that's the point, right? Like all jokes aside, it's about workflow, and if you find value glancing at the console and seeing everything that's a particular shade of yellow is coming from a certain class, you now suddenly have more information than you did before, right? That is a valuable thing for yourself. In fact, actually, one thing you can do as well, which I didn't really set up, but it's probably useful, is currently our log function is just calling debug log with a message. Now, it'll be a lot of work on your part, so I didn't want to do it this way, but you shouldn't just be passing in the actually let's do one quick thing. This is actually an easy fix. I was going to do it. I was going to do it the big complicated way. We can do it a quick way. This will make your life easy. Let's do it this way. Yeah, this is a good compromise.
Okay.
So
Bonus lesson, everybody.
So inside of the base, the LOS mono behavior. So there's one, I don't say problem, but one lack of behavior that we're adding to this. Whenever we configure the logger, we're setting the settings, but the logger doesn't know who he is logging from. So he's like, I'm logging, but who am I logging for? I don't know who the guy that owns me is, right? Mm-hmm. If he had that information, he could do more stuff. He could query who the logger is and do different things relative to it. So we want to give the iLogger information about who he's in control of. So if you go to the iLogger, and if we make another, we have set settings. Let's make a second one called set owner, and it'll say, who am I logging for? And in this case, we'll pass in we'll say mono behavior. It can be any kind of object, and we could probably change it to context later, but it's fine. So mono behavior will do. Yeah. And so now if we pop back over to our Unity logger, and again, I really want to highlight here, I've decided to make a global change to how every single log in the system works, and look how little code we have to change to do that. That's kind of the point of all of this architecture. Yeah, and you can just clear that. And now the one that matters is this one. So I really want to stress this. The power isn't what we're doing. It's the fact that I can do this without any real concerns. So on line 19, set mono behavior underscore owner, for example.
Wait, go.
So yeah, cache it. So mono behavior is the type, and then underscore owner is the name I'm going to give it. Yep. And then assign owner on 25. Owner equals the mono behavior. And this is why I love this stuff, because this is such a cool free feature that we now get. So we now know who owns this logger. Now Unity already has a really cool feature. So on line 34, where we're calling debug.log, if you put a comma after log color, it'll say context. Who am I logging from? Now we know that question. We know it's underscore owner. So if you pass in underscore owner there, we can now do that in all three of Unity's log methods.
Do I have to call this?
We will, yeah.
Though?
Exactly. In our LOS mono behavior, we now have to assign that. So now underneath set settings, yep.
So right here.
Mm-hmm. You can say set owner, and you can set it to this, literally the word this. So it's me, effectively. Now, if you run the logger again, here's one cool bit of free behavior we've just gotten. So just like run the app.
Yeah.
Now click any log message, and it shows you in the scene which object sent that thing. Look at the hierarchy whenever you click a log.
Oh,
There you go.
nice. That is helpful. And one other question that's for me.
Mm-hmm.
These two at the top, I always like to double click to go in and or maybe it's command click. Or maybe
So
it's not.
so now this is now multiple layers of abstraction down. So you
Yeah.
want to make sure to be clicking the one that comes from the actual class, the log one. So the top one will be it's the fidelity of how it goes down. So the top one will be the one that shows you the actual log you've called
Yeah.
in the class.
Is there a way to hide that? Or do I want to not hide that? And
I leave it because you probably won't need to jump to it. But if you ever want to, like, if you see a message and go, ugh, I want to get rid of that one, you can click that and it'll jump to it and you can delete that line. You could hide it if you wanted. If you hit the triple dot, there's an option to show the stack and you can turn off the stack trace. So
okay.
top right, the triple dot up there on the console. Stack trace logging, I think. No, one of these turns off that sub window. I always forget.
Well, I want this. I just don't want these top two because this came from here.
Yes.
And so I just get hung up because I automatically click the top one and then I get here and like, oh wait, that's not what I want. I didn't want to come here. I want to go back.
Unfortunately not, because what we've done is so it's called a stack trace. So it's saying in code there's a tree of calls and it can't really show you the one you want till it walks the tree. And so it's just showing you the full tree. Now, if you wrote your own logging console window, you could hide that, but unfortunately, the default behavior is that. And I think writing our own embedded Unity editor logging window a little out of scope for this one.
Most likely, I would agree with you there, for sure. So,
well, yeah, I think the point anyway is that now I really can't stress enough. A lot of people look at the architecture stuff and why and all this stuff. I really hope that last bit proves the point. I decided, ooh, wouldn't it be nice? I know Unity has a logging behavior, a way to log the context of the object. How can I make every single log in the entire application use that functionality? And I could come up with that idea. I can go to one place and I change a line and everything works. I don't have to go in and multiply replace things. So the point of all this architecture is to support change. And like I said, if we decided later, what if we don't want the color to come from the class, but we want a color to be generated? You could literally say, if the context of the object, get the type of the name. If the name contains the word stat, print it this color. If the name contains the word whatever, print this color. Like you could come up with a rule and assign that in the logger, and now all logs automatically conform to those rules. Again, probably not a good idea, but the fact that we could do that, or we could, as we said, what if we don't want to flood those logs? And what if we wanted to say, every error log is more important than the other stuff, so how about errors only get sent to a different logger, which then goes to the file system and then saves a file of just the logs? Or every log that comes in that comes from a class that has the word player in it gets sent to a text file. So you could specifically say log all player related errors to a text file in this one place, and there is now a place to do that. That's the point of all this architecture. There is obviously some costs to layering and stuff like that, but you can mitigate it with other patterns, and that's why we're using the null object pattern. In the case where something doesn't have special behavior, you print to the null. Now, there is one other thing that I would change if it was my system. So bring it up in general. We are currently creating instances of a logger for every single mono behavior. We have to create a brand new one. And the reason we do that is because it has custom color settings and a custom owner, right? So we have to do that because the state belongs inside the logger. If it was my own version, I would have a no logger or a null logger, and I would have a Unity logger. And the actual contract, the .log function, would take in the log settings and the owner. That way, the class itself doesn't have to have state. And what I could do is I could have a static singleton version of the Unity logger and the null logger. So even though I could have one class, 10 classes, or a million classes, there's actually only two loggers in existence, the non-logger and the logger that logs to Unity. But to do that, we would have to change the contract of .log to .log with settings and owner, and that would require you to go in and manually rewrite every log function. But because you already have all the logs in place, this is a more efficient way to get you there. But again, that's what I would do differently. I wouldn't have instanced loggers. I would have one global, this logs to Unity, and then that would let me have a more performant version of the same thing. But it's not that big of a deal. Like it's not a huge performance hit. It's just that is a change I would make.
Cool. And then Don just asked, what happens when you make a build with all these custom logs? And is it
That's a very good.
correct that you can just turn them off on build?
Actually, let's do that. One more thing. This is really cool. Actually, I didn't even think of this. Let's do this as a final bonus thing because this is actually pretty cool. So, inside of our base LOS. So this is just a small example. What we could do is see here on line 22 to 24. This is where we are configuring what logger the entire thing uses. Now, this is where it gets a bit interesting. Above that line, so just above 22, write # if space Unity editor. Yeah, Unity _ editor. Yeah. And then next line, do end if or else, whatever the. Yeah. So now, just by adding that line, what'll happen is in the editor, it'll do all of this logging. But at build time, because we're not overriding the editor, the nature of the way the code works, if we build this, it will not replace the logger. The configurer won't run. It'll default to the no logger. And now, no logs in runtime, logs in build. And so you've saved all the performance cost of logging because we're only running that code in the event that it's the editor. And you can imagine having 4 of them here. If Android, log this way. If on iOS, log this way. If in editor, log this way. And if on other device, log this way. So you have so much control now that in the configurator, you can choose per platform solutions you want to do logging. And we don't have to use the same logger. We could say, when in VR, log to a little UI console so I can see it on my hand. When in PC, log to a custom console printed on the screen. When on Android, log to Android's ADB logger. Like you can completely control it here by using these compile time constants. So the answer is right now, it currently does the same thing, but it's as simple as putting in one of those defines for how you want to handle per platform.
And Engage Online gets the points for knowing the answer.
Oh yeah, there you go. Beat me to it. Nice.
Good job. Yeah. Paul Binder asked, changing subjects, any way or future plans to support Legend of the Spoons? He'd love to back the project. Yes. At some point. The whole point of my phase right now is to get the base foundation going. So essentially this one scene that I always play with in that Nature Manufacturer's Meadow demo scene essentially will have the entire game, every function you can do, every type of spell you can do, every type of quest you can do. So it will be a mini game that has all the different things I think the game will have. Now, it's going to have more later. Things are going to change later. But once I have the foundation there, I should have enough pretty pictures, pretty videos to basically start an alpha version and start building the game from the beginning on out. Starting with your first quest. It's going to be in a cave. I already know that. And then you're going to exit the cave and be in the first town, talk to the first people, etc. That will be the first alpha. At that point, yes, you'll be able to back the game in some sort of Patreon-like thing, probably. I'll figure that part out. For now, of course, if you want to support the game, really support Infinity PBR, all of that money is all the same bucket. So all these other assets we produce, I pay people to do the modeling, to do the animation, the rigging. I'm currently looking for someone to do a level design for an upcoming demo, all that stuff. So if you buy Infinity PBR stuff, you're supporting that project, and all that money goes back into supporting all of this. Same thing if you go to infinitypbr.com and you click the all assets, that's an affiliate link to the asset store. You get a small cut from anything you buy. The Humble Bundle, if you look at our Humble Bundle videos, that has an affiliate link. And by supporting Jason's Ko-fi page, you keep him coming back to help me learn code. So that's supporting me too. And by supporting Infinity PBR, you're supporting the game as well. So that's the web of support. But the easiest thing you can do right now is click the like and subscribe if you haven't already. And for all of you who are watching who haven't subscribed, if you all click subscribe at once, we'll see what happens with that zombie. I don't know what happens. Apparently you guys can't hear the zombie. I do. I get like a really loud bell in my ear, but I guess that's not being piped into the stream, so I'll have to figure that one out. But
And for anybody who doesn't know, I do have a Discord. It's relatively new and it's supporter only. So if you want to join the small but growing community of people, any donation to the Ko-fi page will get you access. So that's that's where I'm at. Later on, there'll be more fancy stuff like I'll be giving code, access to code, and various things. But for now, it's just the private Discord.
one step at a time, just like making a game.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we can call it a stream.
Yeah, I gotta say, it's nice and relaxing. Now I can
Yeah.
stress less when I see the logs in your thing. This is good.
No, you're gonna love the colors. It's gonna be amazing. Different sizes, different colors.
Oh, and I did highlight this. We used RGBA for the color thing. This is another thing too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed. We're not just using color as a word, red, blue, whatever. We're using a color field now with that color converter, which means you can pick any color you want. Which means if you put the alpha low, it'll actually fade. So you could have faded messages that you don't care about as much that'll come up partially transparent. So sometimes I'll do that if it's like if you want to keep them but you don't take attention, you could set them to like a light gray or a faded red or something, and it won't be as apparent on the list.
See, what you don't realize is now I'm gonna figure out how to make the messages flash. So if they're really important, they're just gonna change colors in the console just to grab my attention.
I really shouldn't show you how icons work because you can put icons and emojis, but I'm not going to go there.
Oh, I can put the Anakin emoji every time it's working. I can have him say, "It's working." So I don't have to look, I can just hear it.
And you can actually ping and play sounds too, but let's not do that.
No, I don't think I'll go that deep. Yeah. All right, well, thank you for joining, Jason. And thank you, everyone, for participating and for coming to the second stream after the first one failed miserably. I'll be streaming probably later tonight. I'm going to take a break now, go out to get some fresh air. Jason, are you doing anything? Any videos?
The next one is probably Tuesday. That's probably the next big video. But hey, anybody who hasn't seen them, I do have 3 videos up at the moment on my channel, and you're welcome to see what you think of those. Mostly they're focused around setting up projects because I wanted to get people up on a good starting point. But once it's running, I'm going to be moving into a wider array of topics. I'm going to have a series on architectural principles like this. I'm also going to start doing some videos specifically on system design and building like this, basically building a logging solution. And without getting too much down that rabbit hole, I do want to point out the answer isn't building the perfect system. Like we don't have a global checkbox right now, but what we do have is the ability that when we decide we want one, there's now a place in the code to put it without worrying. So when it does come to system design, I'll be going slowly through it, kind of getting people to focus on the idea that you don't need to solve every problem. It's not about building a complicated system. It's about taking a decision that might change and just wrapping it. And we'll build up a more complicated stuff over time. So short answer, not right now, but probably Tuesday or Wednesday, there'll be a new video. And if you on the channel, hit the little bell icon, you'll get notifications, as I'm sure you know, whenever that drops.
Yeah. And next week, the regular Game Dev show should be back on Jason Wyman's channel. And there you go. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and night.